Representation in media is a hotly debated topic, and it's honestly not hard to understand why. Whilst I disagree with many of the points often made, it is also often the case that representation is pandering and done out of necessity. Myself and many others agree that whilst complete representation isn't necessary in any one piece of media, it's still important to see it across the board because people deserve closure and relatability from characters and their experiences. Mental health illnesses and neurodivergence are typically the most misrepresented things in media, and it honestly made me a skeptic. Seeing 13 Reasons Why and Big Mouth more than once in best shows for mental illnesses lists is just not okay. Needless to say, when Celeste was announced as the Game of the Year nominee in 2018 and won as Best Independent Game, I was skeptical but also somewhat hopeful. The fact that someone thought Ninja was an appropriate person to talk about Celeste also felt like a bit of a red flag, to be honest. When playing Celeste, I expected the game to be overrated, but still a somewhat fun time where the game's representation of anxiety is either going to be done with mediocrity or just plain badly. I was wrong. Quick disclaimer, what constitutes a spoiler is subjective. If you are someone who is sensitive to spoilers, or if you were interested by the footage at the start of this video, I recommend pausing it and playing Celeste. If you're on the fence about playing it, I recommend asking yourself whether or not you enjoy mechanically simple games with straightforward gameplay, but is instead almost unrivaled in its difficulty. Or if you want to play a game with a simple and relatively non-dramatic story that is more thematic, personal, and educational. I don't want to imply that these two things are separate from each other, or that the gameplay or story are bad, it's just that they are good enough to act as separate and justifiable selling points for playing Celeste. It's a great game, and this video will still be waiting for you once you've finished. However, I personally believe that watching this will not negatively impact your time playing Celeste. Whilst I am going to spoil parts of the game, I highly doubt this video will spoil your experience with it. So, without any further delay, I invite you to enjoy my critique, analysis and review of Celeste. Upon approaching the base of Celeste Mountain, I encountered a beautiful art style, a gorgeous soundtrack, and a harsh confrontation with anxiety, alongside insufferably difficult gameplay. After finally reaching the summit, I felt as though I had conquered something within myself. I felt overwhelming joy when acknowledging both mine and Madeline's growth and accomplishments. I had finally realised what Celeste had set out to accomplish, and I now regard it as a masterpiece. Celeste combines the real-life experience of wanting to conquer obstacles within a video game with the wholesome and compelling character arc of Madeline wanting to conquer obstacles within herself. This teaches us about anxiety whilst connecting us with the protagonist in a way that I'm yet to see with other video games. The game introduces itself as light-hearted but jolly characters and adorably synthesized voices. The gameplay is simple, sharp, and concise. Madeline's main moveset consists of a single jump, climbing, which uses up an invisible stamina gauge, and a dash, which changes the colour of her hair and only refills when she is in contact with safe ground again. Despite the simple and almost magical gameplay mechanics, its core message is surprisingly grounded and relevant. Madeline is constantly sad and anxious and never really knows why. Her anxiety later confronts her as an evil purple doppelganger. Madeline believes that she should abandon a part of herself when she soon learns to converse with her counterparts and work alongside them. She learns to live with her anxiety and deal with it in a way which eventually plays to her advantage, both presented in gameplay and Madeline's character growth. Most other games silently teach their players mechanics and tricks with secrets and challenges in order to make the later parts of the game easier. Celeste does this exceedingly well, frequently placing new items in safe, enclosed spaces for you to experiment and learn new mechanics without being fed written prompts. But it also often takes a real-world approach by making you struggle through the game independently when it's at its toughest, in order to teach you to keep moving forward when life is at its toughest. Celeste is also the first game I've played which features an engaging discussion between characters about what depression and anxiety actually feel like. I ended up feeling for all of the characters and their problems without ever being told that I have to. On that note, whilst the written dialogue and synthesized voices aren't quite as expressive as other games, Katana Zero for example, there is an immense amount of detail in the way in which it is conveyed in order to express emotions and personality. Theo's text box is tartan fabric and appears warm and inviting, whereas Madeline's is pretty but brittle and breaking down from the outside, alluding to her deteriorating mental health. Also, I've decided that for the rest of this video, I'll be referring to Madeline's evil purple doppelganger as Badeline. It's just easier for me. Celeste starts off by giving you short challenges with frequent areas of safe land, so that you can comfortably use Madeline's dash and climbing as you please, whilst learning and getting to grips with the basics of the game. As the game progresses, safety nets become fewer and further between. The only ways to refill Madeline's dash and stamina in later chapters come from jump pads, crystals, and weird flying bubbles, all of which will push you to your limits and Madeline further away from safety, therefore forcing you into an anxiety-inducing purgatory which leaves you struggling to catch your breath. The long and challenging platforming segments all heighten the threat of failure, causing you to overthink your moves, which often leads to your demise. Despite having one of the central messages of the game being that everyone has one life and should live it without being overwhelmed or reluctant to face challenges head-on, to put it bluntly, Celeste will make you die more times than countable. Luckily, respawning is often just as quick as dying, which helps the game keep moving forward at a good pace and makes every challenge just about bearable. The supposedly evil Badeline is the manifestation of Madeline's own fears, regret and self-loathing. She chases you throughout most of Old Sight, the second chapter of the game's main story, and this robs you of the luxury of playing at your own pace, therefore pushing you further and further both literally and metaphorically. What's interesting is that without Badeline, Old Sight is relatively easy, but Celeste scares you into self-doubt, and this is what makes it challenging. Celeste teaches us not to let Badeline, and what she represents, scare us and give up, but instead to fall back on the trust we have in our own abilities. Celeste not only keeps the game moving forward through challenging gameplay, strong storytelling, and a promise of narrative resolution, but it paces itself extremely well with a lovely and original soundtrack by Lena Raine. It decisively creates the moods and emotions that each area is meant to evoke, and often combines with new, natural or unnatural hazards in the game to give each location life and depth. The melodies in the background often change dynamically in accordance with your progress. This is done to such an extreme that not all of the game's music can be found within the OST, which is bloody impressive. Celeste's art style is equally simple and pretty, but shares just enough detail to hide secrets and beauty, while still managing to provide each area of the game with its own identity. The average person, myself included, will see Celeste's cute art style and low age rating and assume that the game is accessible to everyone. If you've ever even touched the game, you'd know that this simply isn't the case. Unfortunately, at certain times Celeste can feel almost unbeatable in the later challenges of the story. And although these can be relieved with the support mode, this completely undermines the sense of achievement the game wants you to feel. This means that the game is often inaccessible to too large a number of players, despite the fact that everyone deserves to experience Celeste for what it has accomplished and for what it teaches. In order to resolve this issue, I feel Celeste should use better means to address the intended demographic for the game, and, without changing the overall difficulty, make certain levels in the later story less demanding. While Celeste does a good job of allowing most players to play the game how they want, the game doesn't accommodate players who want to play the game with the intended experience but lack the skill to do so. This wouldn't pose an issue if Celeste defined a clearer audience in a similar way to Dark Souls or Ghosts and Goblins, but instead the game proposes Assist mode as a solution, which attempts to be inclusive for these types of players but instead compromises the experience too much. Whilst the game does suffer from inaccessibility issues in some places, the devotion to accessibility in most other areas is extremely admirable. Using the game's assist mode doesn't disable Xbox achievements or PlayStation trophies. I understand this to be a bit controversial, but I completely agree with this approach. Whilst it does reduce the criteria for completionists and reduce the demand for skill, it does still reward those who take the time to play the game in its entirety but do need help doing so. Each chapter of Celeste's story features a B-side and C-side cassette tape hidden behind optional and difficult platforming, which unlocks that same chapter of the story, with harder challenges and levels, and new music. There are also 2 bonus chapters for the story, which unlock after it has been completed, which completely change the game in surprising and exciting ways with new mechanics and challenges that I won't spoil here. One of these chapters, The Core, builds on the game's existing mechanics in ways that are engaging, but it's unfortunate that it lacks the challenge of the B-sides you have to complete in order to unlock it. The other of these 2 chapters is DLC. I won't elaborate on it here as I feel it warrants its own video. Also, I'm too bad to beat it in time for this review. After finishing Chapter 8 Seaside, the game rewards you with Variant Mode. This is the part of the game that I personally found the most questionable. Madeline only becomes playable with the unlock of this, and it felt far too late. By this point in the game, you would have most likely complete every challenge in the game but the DLC. Playing as an alternate character is a staple of a lot of platformers, and some other single player games too. Luigi and Mario games, Super Meat Boy's alternate characters, sorry I suck too much at the game for this footage, and Palpatine in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. At least I think it's Palpatine. Sorry, I'm not much of a Star Wars fan, by the way. Not only this, but Celeste also presents Madeline's character model very early into the game, causing you to expect this reward. Receiving her as a reward after Chapter 7 would have also been well contextualized due to the thematic conclusion of the game's story. In order to incentivize playing the game past the final chapter, I feel it would have been much better to give you Madeline as a playable character after just beating the summit. And after each B-side and C-side level, you unlock a new option for Variant Mode, starting with Super Dashes and finishing with Hiccup Mode. Assist Mode could have also just consisted of controlled dashes, game speed control, and infinite dashes in order to mitigate the challenge but not undermine it. Occasionally trigger dialogue from Madeline or Theo during challenging segments after a certain amount of deaths would have also done a great deal. Celeste's strangest but also most decisive optional challenge is the search for weird flying strawberries that are often hidden or teased in plain sight, and almost every one requires an extremely tricky quest of platforming and climbing to reach. There is no in-game or technical reward for collecting all of these. This is therefore a test of strength and determination, so the reward is a great sense of self-accomplishment and personal achievement. The lack of a given reason to find these strawberries prevents your own determination from being undermined, much like Madeline's own rewardless and personal quest to climb Celeste's mountain. A variant of these strawberries are the golden strawberries found once per level. In order to obtain these, you need to finish a level without dying at all. These simulate death. I believe these are to be perceived as optional challenges that simulate Madeline's journey authentically, where death is tangible. I also think it's worth mentioning that these could just be interpreted as an incentive to use assist mode, potentially causing purists and completionists alike to swallow their pride in order to give the console achievements less weight. It took me around 8.5 hours to complete Celeste's main story on my first attempt and around 4.5 hours on my second, but all of these extra challenges easily give the game more than 30 plus hours of total content to complete. Celeste is the only piece of media that I have interacted with so far that accurately depicts anxiety in such a visceral and educational way. Too much of media only states that fictional characters have anxiety in order to represent mental health or token on the issue without exploring its implications or solutions. Celeste is phenomenal, and it deserves to be celebrated for this achievement alone. However, Celeste is seemingly the first game to address this theme, and is therefore the first to experience the potential problems that come with this. Celeste depicts a panic or anxiety attack around the halfway point of its story, and this is arguably the peripeteia of the story, where the direction of Madeline's character arc seemingly changes and she begins to interact with other characters more instead of acting solely independent. This depiction of a panic attack is intimate and well executed, and it doesn't extemporize around the issue unlike a lot of other media covering controversial or nuanced ideas. However, it is never stated in the game that panic or anxiety attacks can exist in other ways to the one that is presented. Whilst they do often include hyperventilating or curling into a fetal position, they can also consist of headaches, paresthesia, or depersonalization. It may sound like nitpicking to address this issue, but I feel this could be problematic as it is the only issue in the game that could provoke real-world, tangible consequences. If someone's only experience with and knowledge of mental health issues is just from Celeste, which sadly isn't far-fetched, they could misinterpret or disregard someone's panic attack or anxiety attack if it doesn't present itself in the same way as Madeline's. I feel that a simple and short disclaimer at any point in the game, or dialogue from the characters, could have easily addressed this problem. On a scale from Z to J, I give Celeste an A for astounding. Celeste is arduous, authentic about anxiety, infrequently annoying, and just all-round amazing, really. Unfortunately, Celeste's primary issue is its lack of accessibility. Even if part of Celeste's story is its challenge, it is simply too difficult for too large a number of players, and there are few ways to improve on this without undermining the game's central themes and core experience. However, Celeste is still one of the greatest platformers ever made and is proof that video games are a great medium for any art form. It has outstanding narrative, characters, visuals and music, with extremely hard, stressful and fun gameplay. Celeste connects people with its protagonist in a way that only video games can. Both you and Madeline persevere physically and mentally to climb Celeste Mountain, and it's one of the few pieces of media that successfully offers an intimate glimpse into complex emotions and mental health. Each character feels relatable and realistic, even in the harshest aspects of their personalities. Celeste's story is surprisingly wholesome and down to earth. Nearly every part of the game feels like it has been fully realised with heart and intent. Thank you so much to the 7-ish% of you who made it this far into the video. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe for more, hopefully better content in the future. Don't forget to ring the bell thingy too, so you know whenever my next videos come out. If you didn't enjoy the video, and somehow you made it this far in, probably spite watching the whole time, please leave a like anyway, and spite subscribe as well. This is my first attempt at anything like this, and I'd like to make sure that my channel becomes something more official and professional moving into the future. Please leave your thoughts on Celeste and game recommendations in the comments down below, and please leave your feedback and criticisms of this video down there too. I was restricted by an alright microphone I bought on Amazon, alongside free editing software and the game clip recorders built into my Nintendo Switch and Xbox One. As my channel grows, I might set something up to help me afford the means to make better content, but hey, only time will tell. Lastly, I played Celeste first on my Nintendo Switch and second on my Xbox One, where I recorded my whole playthrough of it. I experienced no performance issues between anywhere I played it, and I can recommend it on all of those platforms. Thanks again for watching, TTFN.